Today was the first day of the defense's case, and y'all, it was just as explosive as I kind of thought it would be. Today is Friday, May 30th, and we just wrapped up day 24 in Karen Reed's second trial. All right, so first up, before the jurors even come into the courtroom, Alan Jackson argues a motion that basically asks the judge to give a directed verdict. So it's basically saying there's not enough evidence to even send this to a jury. You should just go ahead and say not guilty. Now, specifically, he also argues counts 1 and 3, saying that there's no intent or mens rea that Karen intended to hit and kill John O'Keefe. And then Brennan got up and argued that Karen driving forward and then driving backward showed intentional conduct, and that a reasonable person could find that that conduct created a strong likelihood of death. So both sides argued their case, and Bev ruled in favor of the Commonwealth, and AJ's motion is denied. Now, this is a common thing. It happens in almost every single trial. After the prosecution has rested their case, the defense will pretty much always file a motion for a directed verdict and say, they didn't even show everything. We should just throw this all out. And it very, very, very rarely happens, but it's pretty much standard for them to at least try. Okay, so then the jury is brought in, and the defense brings in their first witness. It's Matthew Doga. Now, Doga is an accident reconstruction engineer and specializes in vehicle data and data recorders. Now, he was hired by the defense for this case, but he did know of Aperture and Shannon Burgess prior to being hired. So here's kind of like a simple breakdown of his main points. Now, he was brought in specifically to look at the Aperture reports and then clarify them for the defense. The first one is Shannon Burgess's first report. Now, he says that Burgess basically kind of looked at the clock variants from Karen Reed's SUV and John O'Keefe's phone, and then he gave kind of multiple approaches on how to align those clocks. But he said Burgess didn't actually go through with the calculations there. He just noted some different data that you could potentially compare and different variances on that data so that you could figure out the time difference. For example, the calls on John O'Keefe's phone and the time that they lined up with the Bluetooth in Karen Reed's car. So Doga took the different ways that Burgess proposed to align the clocks, and he actually just did the calculations. But here's the thing, with every single possibility, no matter which adjustments were made in any combination, the time that John O'Keefe locked his phone by hitting the button on the side was always after the time that the Commonwealth is saying that Karen Reed had hit John O'Keefe. And obviously that's a problem for the Commonwealth. So after that, now comes Burgess with a new report during trial where he basically says, oh yeah, scrap all of that other information, scrap all of those other calculations. Instead, let's compare it to this 3-point turn. So he does that instead. And now the time variance has shifted and can include the possibility of impact after John O'Keefe hits the lock button on his phone. But apparently, when you consider all the variances, there are like 30 possible options. And he said that only 3 of those fit in that time frame. And Jackson points out that this is only 10% possibility, and Hank objected and it was sustained, but the number was out there for the jury. So Doga confirms that there is no collision history showing on any of the data, and the trigger events don't record that anyway. And then, yes, that was my Bev sigh. And then we get our first glimpse of how Hank Brennan is on cross-examination. And y'all, Hank was Hankin'. The first thing he did is try to ask Doga about tech stream data. And he's asking about acceleration being one example of a trigger event, as in the car will see that you're accelerating and then record the data for 5 seconds before and after that mark. But when he's asking Doga about it, Hank is asking about acceleration, like specifically mentioning 30% acceleration. And the witness explains, okay, the only way that acceleration would be recorded is if the car is in like pre-collision, like if something's about to happen or whatever. And he's right, the car doesn't record acceleration at 30%. To use Dr. Welcher's favorite term, that question doesn't make any sense. But what Hank meant or should have known is when the acceleration pedal is pressed down 30%. That's what causes the trigger. And even though Hank was wrong here, he had the audacity to say this to the witness.
Are you sure you know a lot about text stream data?
Yes.
Sustained.
Do you know a lot about text stream data?
Yes.
He continues his passive-aggressive comments during questioning a few times during his cross, and it gets pretty bad. Like when he was asking DeSogra about when he sent his updated presentation to the defense.
But they had a copy of your PowerPoint on May 25th. Don't be shy.
No, I'm pretty sure it was the 25th.
So it's sustained.
And when he got snarky with the witness here.
I don't know if I would tell other experts what their best practices are. I would say, generally as experts, we do work that our clients ask us to do. So if we're asked to do it, we do it. If our clients say, hey, don't do that, then we don't do it.
Well, you like the phrase best practice on direct, so I'm just wondering if I can borrow that phrase.
Sustained.
And in the one comment that was probably the worst and most disrespectful, in my opinion, when Brennan was asking DeSogra about the data in the report that he was analyzing and where it came from.
The assumption is if the vehicle has a timestamp and the phone wasn't connected, it would have been synchronized after the fact. But that wasn't tested. And Aperture didn't do any of that testing in their work to look at the behavior of a timestamp in the infotainment when a phone is synchronized after the fact.
Blaming Aperture is not going to get you out of answering the question. Did you know?
Sustained. Sure.
But DeSogra definitely held his own. When Hank was pushing DeSogra about his analysis of Aperture's reports, he asked him if he made assumptions on it. And this was DeSogra's response.
I am looking at what Dr. Welcher put in his trial presentation, and my assumption that's baked in there is that he's going to stand behind the things he says in a presentation. So I'm taking them at face value, but as being correct. I'm not guessing.
So on redirect, Alan Jackson had one of my favorite moments of the entire trial. Y'all, you know how I always say I almost fell out of my chair? Well, this time, if you go back and look on the live, it's around, I think, 6 hours in, like you'll see, like you can see the top of my head because I really did literally almost fall out of my chair. Jackson asked DeSogra about his education and his experience.
Were you being truthful when you indicated that you have a certain expertise in EDR data?
Yes.
Were you being truthful when you indicated that you did review Mr. Burgess's data and Mr. Welcher's data as reflected in their reports and PowerPoints?
Yes.
Were you being truthful about your credentials?
Yes.
Have you ever lied about your credentials?
No.
You hold a bachelor's degree
Yes.
and you hold a master's degree.
I do.
You ever lied to anybody about that?
No.
The way that my jaw hit the floor, I couldn't. I think that we can all see why Jackson asked this, because remember all of those discrepancies in Burgess's resume and his education problems, and this poor witness was just like, no, why would I lie? It was hilarious. It was the level of petty that I aspire to be. Now, AJ and Brennan went back and forth a few more times with DeSogra and kind of argued mainly over the idea that DeSogra's analysis was based solely off of Burgess and Welcher's. So if anything was wrong with DeSogra's report, it's because of something in theirs. So both sides finished their questioning, so we will not see him back on the stand, but he was a good witness, and he held things with Brennan a lot better than I think I could have. Now, at the very end of the day, Bev dismissed the jurors and then held a voir dire in relation to Proctor's texts and if they will be admissible into evidence. Now, Yannetti calls a longtime friend of Proctor in for questioning, and it's really just kind of to authenticate these texts that were in a group thread that they were both in. Now, the defense wants to bring in Proctor's group text to show his state of mind and his bias in the investigation. And when we heard these in the last trial, there are texts where Proctor is asked, like, if the homeowner, as in Brian Albert, is going to have some problems. And Proctor's like, nope, He's a Boston cop too. And there's also text to Proctor saying some really harsh and offensive things about Karen, and even text with him telling his friends he won't be able to prove Karen hit John or hit him on purpose, prove intent, but they're going to bring some serious charges on the girl. Now, Brennan doesn't want the defense to be able to bring in the text without bringing Proctor in. And Brennan says he thinks Proctor should be able to answer to his state of mind and what was said. And he argues that the defense should just bring him in. And y'all, based on his response, it looks like maybe Yannetti is a little tired of Hank's approach too. Take a look.
I would note Mr. Brennan is not sitting at defense counsel table in this case. We appreciate the offer to help us with strategy about which witness we should call, but that's solely the province of the defense to determine which witness we want to use to authenticate and admit text messages. That's our choice, and we should not be deprived of that choice because Mr. Brennan thinks there's a better witness that should have introduced the text messages. There is no rule. There's no best witness rule in this case. I believe my co-counsel has already made that argument in another circumstance.
And that's a wrap on the week. There's a lot of stuff that happened. There's going to be a lot that I will break down in the podcast this week. So make sure to check out 13th Juror podcast. It should be out on Sunday. And next week will be all defense. Who do y'all think will be next up for the defense? Let me know in comments. My money's on Lucky, the snowplow driver. I heard he was seen at the courthouse today. There's also Kelly Dever, who was brought in today. The defense has tried to call her. She used to be a Canton police officer, and now she's Boston PD. So maybe we'll hear from her. We did not hear from her in the last trial. So let me know who you think in comments. Let me know who you want to hear from. And tell me your thoughts, because everybody seems to be divided on this. Do you think that the defense should call Proctor or not? Let me know, because everybody's divided and I want to see what y'all say. Now, we will be back Monday morning at 9 a.m. So make sure to join us right here on Crime Junkie Jury.